They called him a hero once. Now the Black Tomb Guard stood silent as they prepared to take his badge, his honor, and maybe his freedom. The crowd outside Arlington whispered about what happened that day, some furious, some in awe, none of them knowing the whole story. All they saw was a soldier breaking the unbreakable rule, a Black Tomb Guard leaving his post. What they didn't see was the moment a police officer aimed a taser at a 9-year-old girl. What they didn't hear was the scream that made a decorated soldier choose between his oath and his blood. And what no one in that inquiry room understood yet was this: sometimes breaking the rules is the only way to keep your soul. Before we dive into the story, where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. And if you believe that values like honor, courage, and sacrifice still matter, join us in keeping their legacy alive. He stood motionless. Under the blazing summer sun, in front of the tomb of the unknown soldier, Staff Sergeant James Carter didn't move an inch. His heels locked, his chin lifted just enough to hold perfect posture. His white gloves gripped the ceremonial rifle with a kind of stillness that made strangers wonder if he was even real. To the crowd, he looked like every other Black Tomb Guard they'd seen in postcards or documentaries. Impeccable uniform. Navy dress coat pressed so sharply it could cut glass. Brass buttons shining like tiny suns. Dark sunglasses hiding his eyes. A living statue carved from discipline and ritual. But inside, James Carter was alive. And today, more than ever, he wasn't just a soldier. He was a father. In the front row behind the braided ceremonial rope, his 9-year-old daughter Lily stood on tiptoe, craning her neck to see him better. Her dark blonde ponytail danced in the soft breeze as she clutched a tourist brochure in one hand and her stuffed bear in the other. Beside her, Aunt Clara rested a hand on her shoulder, reminding her quietly to stay calm. Lily already knew the rules. Don't wave. Don't call out. Don't distract Daddy when he's working. She'd memorized them like a secret code. She followed them because she was proud. Because this was who her dad was, a Black Tomb Guard, a protector of something bigger than both of them. James's eyes never shifted, but behind his sunglasses, he was aware of everything. The soft murmur of tourists, the click of cameras, the respectful hush that fell when the crowd caught sight of the mat he walked. He could even sense exactly where Lily stood without looking. Years of training had sharpened his awareness, until the air itself told him when something shifted. But even the sharpest instincts can't predict everything. Because 30 yards away, moving through the crowd with a scowl carved deep into his face, Officer Robert Vance was looking for a fight. Vance had been a cop for 20 years, and he looked built like a wall that had learned to walk upright. Shoulders broad, head shaved close, jaw set like concrete. He was angry today. Angry at his lieutenant for writing him up about excessive force complaints. Angry at his ex-wife for calling about overdue payments. Angry at the tourists crowding the plaza as if this sacred ground was just another photo op. He hated babysitting this assignment. He wanted control, and today he was going to find someone to prove it on. The breeze picked up suddenly, rattling the posts and ropes, sending a few pamphlets fluttering into the air. The braided line sagged for just a moment. Lily, trying to see better, stepped forward half an inch barely over the line. She didn't even notice, and that was when Vance saw her. "Hey!" His voice cut through the air like a whip. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. A few parents instinctively pulled their children closer. Lily froze instantly, her little hand gripping the rope, wide-eyed like a deer caught in headlights. Aunt Clara bent low, murmuring gently, "It's okay, honey. Just stay still." "She didn't mean it," Clara said quickly, stepping forward. "She's a child."
Ow.
She's back behind the rope now. Vance didn't care. Not today.
Oh.
"You think this is a game?" He barked, boots slamming against the stone as he closed the distance. "You cross that line, you break security protocol." Clara raised her palms. Protective now. "Officer, please." "She's 9 years old." Vance's hand slid down to the yellow holster on his belt. His thumb brushed the safety cap of his taser. James heard it before he saw it. That voice, sharp, angry, a woman pleading, a child's gasp. He didn't turn his head. Couldn't. But under the perfect stillness of his uniform, his pulse jumped hard in his neck. Something was wrong. Lily, he wanted to move. God, every muscle in his body screamed to move, but the rules were clear. Black tomb guards do not leave post ever. No exceptions, no distractions. And yet somewhere deep inside, a single thought pushed against that rule. Louder than protocol, louder than fear, louder than everything. If he hurts her, James's jaw tightened in behind his sunglasses. His eyes locked forward, unblinking as the seconds ticked down toward the moment that would change everything. Step back. Officer Vance's voice cracked across the courtyard like a rifle shot. Tourists went silent. Phones started to rise above heads, lenses blinking red as recording lights came on. The kind of hush that comes right before something bad happens settled over the plaza. Aunt Clara raised her hands higher, keeping her body between Lily and Vance. Please. She's just a little girl. Vance ignored her. His boots struck the marble stones hard, his shadow falling across them both. Rules are rules, he snapped, unhooking the taser from his belt with a sharp, practiced motion. Doesn't matter if she's 9 or 19, you cross the line. You pay attention when someone says stop. Lily whimpered softly, her small body trembling. Clara tried one last time, her voice breaking. Officer, please. She didn't know. Vance barked back. Ignorance doesn't excuse danger, and then he raised the taser. Across the plaza, James Carter saw it. It wasn't supposed to look, but somehow his eyes found them anyway. Lily, tiny and shaking behind her aunt, and Vance's arm, extended, weapon trained on his little girl. The world narrowed into a tunnel. The sounds of the crowd faded into static. Every detail sharpened, the light flashing off Vance's badge. The glint of Lily's hair in the sun, the faint ripple of the ceremonial rope swaying in the breeze, and the taser. No, not her. James's training screamed in his head, words drilled into his bones. Remain at post. Do not react. Do not engage. Protect the tomb above all else. But another voice rose louder, a voice older and stronger than any protocol. That's your daughter. His heart thundered in his ears. His breath came slow and tight through his nose, controlled only by sheer will. He felt the rifle in his hands, the weight of its polished wood grounding him. Every instinct said to move, every rule said to stay. Then Vance squeezed the trigger. The sharp pop of compressed nitrogen cracked the silence, followed by the high-pitched crackling hiss of 50,000 volts. Lee screamed. A sound so piercing, so small and terrified, it cut straight through James's chest like shrapnel. The wires struck her. Her tiny body jolted violently, arms snapping upward as if pulled by invisible strings, and then she collapsed onto the stones. For one endless moment, there was nothing. Then chaos detonated. My God, someone shouted. Somebody call an ambulance, another screamed. Parents pulled children back. Tourists cursed under their breath. Phones filmed from every angle, dozens capturing what no one would believe without seeing. Clara fell to her knees, cradling Lily in her arms, her voice breaking into sobs as she called her name over and over. Lily's small body twitched once, then went frighteningly still, only faint breaths showing she was still there. And James broke. He felt the click in his chest like a rifle safety being switched off. His boots moved before his mind fully caught up. One step forward, heel striking marble hard enough to echo. The crowd gasped as one. Black tomb guards don't move. It was the rule, the unbreakable constant. God. But James wasn't a black tomb guard anymore in that moment. He was a father. His second step landed heavier, faster. Behind his sunglasses, his jaw locked, muscles twitching like a storm bottled under glass.
Ass.
Every inch of his body carried tension coiled tight like a predator stalking prey. Vance turned at the sound of boots. What are you doing? He barked, raising the taser again instinctively. Stay back. You move another step, and James's voice cut through him like a blade, low and calm, controlled in a way that made the air colder. Drop the weapon. It wasn't a request. Vance laughed once, sharp and humorless, trying to mask the flicker of uncertainty creeping into his voice. You take one more step, Sergeant, and that's assault on an officer. You'll be in cuffs before the day's out. James didn't answer, didn't blink, didn't stop. Officer Karen Walsh whispered behind Vance, her voice trembling now. Put it down. It's a child. Vance ignored her, focusing on the 6-foot figure closing in. Dress blues perfect, ceremonial rifle angled tight in his grip. The sunglasses hid James's eyes, but Vance could feel them locked on like a targeting system. For a split second, Vance's knuckles whitened around the taser grip. He was still convinced he controlled this scene, but deep down something older and primal stirred, because predators recognize each other and James Carter wasn't stopping. Another step, 4 feet away now. Vance aimed the taser directly at James's chest. I said, "Stand down." James didn't raise his voice, didn't shift his stance. He just repeated the same 3 words, slower this time, softer, but carrying weight like a loaded chamber. "Drop the weapon." Vance hesitated, and in that heartbeat, everything shifted because Lily whimpered softly from the ground. A tiny, broken sound, and James heard it. That was the last thread holding him back. His left hand came off the rifle in one motion, fast as lightning, snapping forward to grab Vance by the front of his stab vest. The movement was so clean, so practiced, the crowd didn't process it until Vance's boots left the ground. Suddenly, the big cop was dangling half a foot in the air, staring into the reflection of his own fear in James's sunglasses. "You tased my daughter," James said, voice low and steady, the kind of quiet that carries farther than a shout. "You get one chance to walk away breathing." The plaza went dead silent. No one moved, not even the wind. Vance froze, his boots scraping at the marble stones as James's grip hauled him up effortlessly. 6 feet of disciplined muscle holding 200 pounds of uniformed authority like it was nothing. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Phones tilted higher, recording every second now. Tourists whispered furiously. Parents held their children close. And somewhere, a veteran muttered under his breath, "I've seen that look before." James leaned in, his voice low and deadly calm. Sound meant for Vance alone, but carrying to everyone within earshot. "You fired on my daughter," he said, each word measured and heavy. 9 years old. "You crossed a line you'll never come back from." Vance struggled against the grip, clawing at James's wrist, face flushing red. "Put me down," he rasped, the taser dangling uselessly from his fingers. "You're finished, soldier. Assaulting a police officer on federal property. You're done." James didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. "No," he said quietly, his tone like cold steel drawn across glass. "I'm just getting started, Sergeant Carter." A sharp, commanding voice cut through the tension. Across the courtyard, 6 military police officers pushed through the crowd, moving fast, their boots slapping against the marble stones in unison. At the front strode Captain Laura Bennett, tactical vest snug, hair pulled into a severe bun, eyes scanning the chaos with surgical precision. She didn't hesitate. "Carter, stand down. Now." James's jaw tightened. He turned his head slightly, just enough to register her presence without releasing Vance. "He tased Lily," he said, his voice steady but thick with restrained fury. "She's on the ground." Bennett's gaze dropped instantly to where Aunt Clara knelt, cradling Lily's small body against her lap. 2 medics in the crowd were already there, crouched low, checking her breathing and pulse. Lily stirred weakly, letting out a faint whimper that made Clara choke back a sob of relief. Bennett's expression hardened. She faced Vance. "Sergeant Vance, drop your weapon." Vance, still dangling half an inch off the ground, wheezed out, "He assaulted me." "This man's out of control. He attacked a law enforcement officer while I was securing the perimeter." Walsh, Vance's partner, finally stepped forward, her face pale but determined. "Captain, with respect, he tased a 9-year-old. No warning. She barely stepped over the rope. I told him to stand down." The murmurs of the crowd swelled louder. Angry whispers turned into outright shouts. "He shot a kid. She's 9 years old. Arrest him." Several tourists pointed their phones directly at Vance, narrating into live streams, their voices tight with outrage. The air buzzed with tension, electric and sharp as wire. Bennett raised a hand, silencing the noise with a single commanding gesture. Her voice was firm, cutting clean through the chaos. "Corporal Lee," she ordered one of her MPs, "take Sergeant Vance into custody. Charges: assault on a minor, excessive use of force, and conduct unbecoming." Vance's eyes went wide. "Can't, Captain. This is outrageous. I was enforcing security protocol." Bennett's gaze sliced into him, icy and unblinking. "Your authority ended the moment you put 50,000 volts into a child." Lee stepped forward, snapping handcuffs onto Vance's wrist with practiced precision. Vance tried to twist away, but James finally released him, letting the officer stumble backward into Lee's hold. The crowd erupted into applause and not cheers. Applause, a ripple of solidarity, relief, and vindication sweeping through the plaza. Vance shouted over the noise, his voice thick with rage. "You're all making a mistake. This will be in my report. Every single one of you will." Bennett cut him off coldly. "Take him away." James knelt beside Lily, now lowering himself carefully to the stones. He set his rifle down, white gloves trembling slightly as his hands cupped her small face. "Princess," he whispered, his voice breaking despite himself. "Daddy's here. You're safe." Lily blinked slowly, her lashes wet with tears. Her voice was faint but steady enough to slice through the chaos. "Daddy, it hurts." "I know, sweetheart," he murmured, brushing a damp strand of hair from her forehead. "I know, but you're okay. I've got you." The medic leaned in, speaking quickly but calmly. "She's breathing. Pulse is steady. Minor burns from the electrodes, but she's going to be fine. We'll transport her to the clinic for monitoring just to be safe." James nodded once, swallowing hard against the lump in his throat. He glanced up at Clara, who wiped tears from her face with a trembling hand, relief flooding her features. Bennett crouched beside him, her voice low enough for only James to hear. "You know there'll be an inquiry," she said gently. "Leaving your post, engaging Vance. Everything that happened here today is going to be reviewed." James nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving Lily's small hand curled around his finger. "I understand, ma'am." Bennett studied him for a long moment, then said, quieter still for what it's worth, "Any father who wouldn't have done the same thing doesn't deserve the uniform." James finally looked up, meeting her eyes. There was no apology there, no regret, just something sharper, something unshakable. "I'd do it again," he said simply. Bennett nodded once. No. The MPs led Vance out of the plaza in handcuffs. Tourists stepped aside as he passed, some hurling sharp words under their breath, others silent but recording everything. Walsh trailed behind, head low, her expression unreadable. Meanwhile, paramedics gently lifted Lily onto a stretcher, Clara holding her small hand as they secured her for transport. James walked beside them, one palm resting lightly on Lily's shoulder, steadying her, grounding himself. The tomb loomed behind them, still and eternal, its silence undisturbed, despite the storm that had just erupted in its shadow. For the first time in his career, James walked away from it. Not as a guard, not as a soldier, just as a father. 3 days later, the inquiry began. A long mahogany table filled the conference room, sunlight spilling across polished brass nameplates. At the far end sat a panel of senior officers, their uniforms crisp, their expressions carefully neutral. Captain Laura Bennett sat among them, hands folded neatly, her gaze steady and sharp. Staff Sergeant James Carter stood at attention on the other side, his dress blues immaculate, shoes shining like mirrors. He'd slept maybe 6 hours in the past 3 days, but you wouldn't know it from the set of his shoulders. "Staff Sergeant Carter," began Colonel Richard Hayes, his voice even but weighty. "Do you understand why you're here today?" "Yes, sir," James replied, his tone calm, controlled. "You left your post during ceremonial duty," Hayes continued, scanning his notes. "Engaged physically with a Metropolitan Police sergeant. You did so in front of more than 200 civilians, dozens of whom recorded the incident. Are these facts in dispute?" "No, sir," James said firmly. "They are not." The colonel leaned back slightly, removing his glasses. "Then explain why." James's throat tightened, but his voice didn't waver. "Ooh, sir." "My daughter, Lily Carter, 9 years old, was assaulted by Sergeant Robert Vance with a taser. She was unarmed. She posed no threat. She was standing behind the ceremonial rope. She stepped maybe half a foot past the line. He drew a slow breath, his jaw clenching briefly before continuing. I watched him fire 50,000 volts into her chest. I heard her scream and I made a choice." A younger major on the panel shifted, his brows furrowing. "You understand the gravity of breaking formation, Sergeant? Black tomb guards don't move ever. That discipline defines us." James nodded once. "Yes, sir, I understand. Today. But there's a difference between discipline and blind obedience. There's a difference between protecting a symbol and protecting a life. The words hung in the air like stone, and for a long moment nobody spoke. Finally, Captain Bennett leaned forward, sliding a folder across the table. With the panel's permission, she said, "I'd like to submit video evidence from the incident. Multiple civilian recordings corroborate Sergeant Carter's account." Colonel Hayes nodded. "Proceed." Bennett tapped a button on the tablet in front of her, and the screen on the far wall lit up. The footage played in silence. Lily stepping forward slightly, Vance shouting, the taser firing, Lily collapsing. Then the moment the black tomb guard broke stillness, walking toward his daughter, confronting Vance, taking him off his feet. Even without sound, the tension radiated from the screen. By the end, a quiet settled over the room, heavier than words. When the video ended, Hayes removed his glasses, folding them carefully. "Sergeant Carter," he said slowly, "this panel has reached a decision." James straightened instinctively, hands clasped behind his back. "There will be no court-martial," Hayes said simply. "Your actions are hereby deemed extraordinary, but justified given the circumstances." James exhaled quietly, relief washing over him like cold water. But he didn't move, didn't smile, didn't speak. "However," Hayes continued, "you will receive an official letter of reprimand for abandoning post during ceremonial duty. It will remain in your record." James nodded once, accepting the weight without resistance. Bennett glanced at him, and for the first time in 3 days, her expression softened. "You did what any father would have done," she said. "And for what it's worth, it mattered." That evening, back in their small apartment behind Fort Myer, James sat on the edge of Lily's bed, watching her color quietly in her notebook. A patch of sunlight slanted through the blinds, landing across her yellow t-shirt, soft and warm. She looked up at him with wide blue eyes, her voice small. "Daddy, you moved." He smiled faintly, a rare, tired smile. "Yeah," he said softly. "Were you scared?" she asked, her tiny fingers gripping the edge of her drawing. He thought about it for a moment, letting the silence stretch before answering. "A little," he admitted. "But some things are more important than rules, like me," she whispered. "Especially you," he said, brushing a loose strand of hair from her forehead. Lily leaned against him, resting her head on his chest, her voice muffled but steady. "I'm glad you moved, Daddy." James wrapped an arm around her small shoulders, holding her close, closing his eyes for a moment as the weight of the last few days finally began to ease. "I am too, Princess," he whispered. "I am too." The footage from that day spread across the country and ours. Millions watched, parents cried, veterans spoke out. Some argued about protocol, others debated policing. But most saw only one thing, a father choosing his daughter over his duty and what that meant. News anchors called it the Arlington standoff. Social media called James a hero. And though he hated the word, he couldn't ignore what it revealed. People needed reminders that rules matter, yes, but humanity matters more. That night, long after Lily fell asleep, James stood by the window, the soft glow of Arlington visible in the distance. He traced the faint outline of the tomb with his eyes, silent and eternal under the moonlight, whispered to himself, barely audible, "I'm not just a soldier, I'm her dad. That's the only duty that ever mattered." Behind him, Lily stirred in her sleep and murmured softly, "I love you, Daddy." James turned, smiling faintly as he whispered back into the quiet room, "I love you too, Princess." Sometimes honor isn't about standing still. Sometimes real strength means breaking the rules to protect the ones who can't protect themselves. Because at the end of the day, the title on your uniform doesn't define you. The people you fight for do. If you enjoyed the story, consider sending a super chat to help bring more stories like this. Now, click on the video on the screen to hear another story that's just as powerful and captivating, with courage, sacrifice, and a choice that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about duty and justice. Click on the video.